You know, that we keep calling this guy Maryland man in the press. Nobody seems to worry about the Maryland mother, Rachel Morin, who was murdered by someone that the previous administration let out of jail.
But not
so
by
this is a
visceral
political issue.
That's incredibly dishonest to conflate.
That's Republican Scott Jennings sending off an entire panel of establishment media shills by pointing out the ridiculousness of their pathetic defense of deported illegal alien and alleged MS-13 gang member Abrigo Garcia. Welcome to Nerk News, I'm Nerkish, and it looks like the fanatics on the left have somehow managed to slide further down the slippery slope of biased reporting and blatant hypocrisy since we last checked in on them, because it appears that they're continuing their long tradition of choosing the worst martyrs imaginable to use as political props for their America Last agenda. Here's Scott Jennings blasting Maryland Senator Van Hollen with a healthy dose of reality after Hollen traveled to El Salvador to virtue signal and make a spectacle out of his meeting with Garcia.
Yeah, listening to Van Hollen explain all this, like if you're explaining how you came to be sipping margaritas with an MS-13 gangbanger who's lived illegally in the United States for 14 years before he was finally deported, you're losing, okay? You're losing. You're losing optically, you're losing politically, and I assume the people of Maryland are wondering, why doesn't this guy ever work as hard for us as he does for this guy who's down in El Salvador, which, by the way, is where he's from in the first place. Look, you know, macro view for me, the American people elected Donald Trump to deport illegal aliens. They especially elected him to deport people who are affiliated with very violent transnational gangs that we now characterize as terrorist organizations. I think he's doing his job, and I think the American people are behind him, and I think the Democrats like Van Hollen look ridiculous standing up for him more than they stand up for the people of the United States of America who are actually citizens of this country.
You know, this whole thing reeks of the inauthentic reactionary politics the left was doing during COVID and the mostly peaceful protests. I mean, after all, Trump was vocally suspicious of China, and instead of listening, Democrats chose to call it xenophobic and have gatherings in Chinatown. Just like when Trump was critical of the BLM riots getting out of hand, instead of doing anything about the violence, Democrats instead chose to double down by painting the streets, supporting bail funds, and making a spectacle out of things like when Kamala Harris met with Jacob Blake and his family. The fact of the matter is, these are the 80-20 issues Jennings repeatedly talks about that out-of-touch liberals think are popular and feel compelled to double down on because they haven't yet realized that we're no longer trapped in Obama-era politics.
I think you guys need to understand, for the Trump administration, there's no version of this man's life that ends up with him living in the United States. Here's the way they view it. He's an illegal alien from El Salvador who came to the country illegally, who has a deportation order, who, in their view, and in the view of some immigration courts, has an affiliation with MS-13. They also believe on the Supreme...
That's not quite what it is. I think that the issue of the MS-13 thing is probably the most unclear of this whole thing. The administration has not provided that concrete evidence that they say they have that he's a part of MS-13, and he strongly disputes in court, right? So this is not me saying it. He has disputed in court that he is a member of MS-13.
I think this is your
but I mean, it's predicated on something that is not necessarily the case.
It's amusing to watch that last point become the entire establishment media and liberal narrative on this topic overnight. I mean, the mother of a victim of a violent illegal alien has enough courage to speak at the White House about a sensitive subject that's dominating the headlines, was central to Trump's agenda, is important to regular Americans, and one of the reasons they voted for him in the first place. Yet all establishment media can manage to do is scoff at it and once again say that it's Republicans playing politics. That is, of course, assuming they chose to air the press briefing at all, which a lot of them outright refused to do.
I want to play a soundbite, however, from Patty Morin. She's the mother of Rachel Morin, who was raped and murdered by an undocumented immigrant back in 2023. And here's how she reacted to Hollen's trip.
And to have a senator from Maryland who didn't even acknowledge or barely acknowledge my daughter and the brutal death that she endured, to fly to El Salvador to bring back someone that's not even an American citizen. Why does that person have more right than I do, or my daughter?
So just to be clear, she was not raped or murdered by Kilmar Abrego Garcia. So two completely different crimes, different times, and Garcia does not actually have a criminal record. But Sarah, I want to talk to you about messaging. And
once again, this is proving the point of the old saying that if Democrats didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any at all. Because call me crazy, but I don't seem to recall these political hacks splitting hairs like this whenever there's a tragedy that they can loosely tie to a white male Christian conservative or any other group that doesn't support their radical agenda. In fact, it's often the exact opposite. Whenever some tragedy happens, pretend journalists and legacy media are first in line to draw whatever absurd conclusions they can to fit their narrative, so much so that they've actually been sued for it. I mean, let's not forget that for the past decade, their entire MO has been about distorting and extrapolating absurd correlations about Trump and his supporters and how they relate to authoritarianism. Yet suddenly, these same people want us to act like there's no issues associated with illegal immigration and we shouldn't pay attention to it until these unvetted foreigners decide to do something violent, at which point liberals in the media say that we can care, but only how they say we can. Which, call me crazy, but it's no wonder this issue is so unpopular for them. But let me know what you think. How do you feel about the Garcia case? Is it all about optics or something deeper? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. That stuff really does help us out. Until then, this has been Nerk News. Thanks for watching. Bye.